when we're in that triggered state, we are not able to have choice. It's the fight, flight, or freeze mode. So we have to process that emotion out of us.
You're listening to Working Forward, a Future of Work focused podcast from People Forward Network. These episodes pave the road ahead, helping us confidently step into the future as a leader who moves people forward. Let's go.
I'm Laurie Shakur, and this is Putting the Human Back in Human Resources. We're diving deep into the world of HR and leadership, exploring pivotal elements that shape workplace dynamics while unraveling the impact of positive leadership and sharing the significance of creating healthy workplaces where people can truly thrive. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. Story time. I struggled all of my childhood, adolescence, and most of my adult life with depression and low self-esteem. As I look back, I didn't even recognize that that's what I was living through. My earliest recollection was always that of not feeling good enough. So, as an individual that has spent a lifetime learning how not to feel, I'm thrilled to share some basic principles on how we can truly value ourselves, how we can reach a point of self love and compassion for our own personal journey. Part of my work has been through reading empowering books. One of those books that's really helped me transform was written by a friend, Susan Schmitt, Winchester. Susan and her writing partner, Martha Finney, wrote the book, Healing at Work. That's exactly what I've done. Many times I've shown up at work invisible, invisible to the pain, invisible to the letdown. But work allowed me to have a meaning and a purpose. Let's have a conversation with Susan Schmitt. Susan, I am so excited to have this opportunity to chat with you today. I couldn't wait. I was thrilled that you made the time to connect with me and our audience.
Of course. Laurie, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for asking me.
Susan, we've known each other now. I want to say we met in 2021. It's been a couple of years.
It has.
And from day one, it was just kindred spirits.
Mm-hmm.
I so respect and admire your courage and your voice in sharing something that so many people just don't talk about. But before we jump right into that, tell me your story. Why don't you share with our listeners your amazing story?
Well, in a nutshell, if you were to look at my resume, which now is shocking to me, is coming up on 36 years in the corporate HR world, like you. And if you look at the resume, it looks great. I mean, I've had an amazing career. I've worked with top companies. The last three companies are all Fortune 500. One of those that I'm head of HR for today is a Fortune 150. But what most people don't know about me and about my accomplishments, which you, of course, do, is that the majority of my career, the majority of my accomplishments were fueled by my underlying belief that I wasn't good enough. And I was really unconscious and unaware of how much some of my past experiences growing up with an unpredictably angry father, how much those experiences shaped how I was showing up in the workplace every single day. And so this isn't about blaming parents or caretakers at all. I think my dad did the best he could. But what I learned in that system was that it was everybody else's job to determine my value. And my job was to be as perfect and as people-pleasing as possible to try to gain that much needed validation. And so it was a really unconscious force that drove so much of my behavior through so many years of my corporate career. And honestly, it's an extremely destructive way to live a life and a career. And as you also know, that many of us high achieving perfectionists who are disconnected from and don't really fully understand how much our past is influencing us, we tend to turn to unhealthy habits to try to self-regulate or self-soothe. And so my daily practice was to go into work, spend all my effort trying to prove myself, particularly to those people, men particularly in authority. And I come home every single night and I would basically give myself a performance review, which was never good. I beat myself up for the evening about what I should have done or shouldn't have done, or what I should have said or I shouldn't have said something. And in a way to take the edge off of the anxiety and the sense of inadequacy, I used Chardonnay. Chardonnay was my very good friend during all those years. And so the story really culminates in a realization that you don't have to live this kind of a career. I call it the unconscious wounded career path. And instead, I teach leaders, executives, individual contributors how to step off that unconscious path onto the conscious healing career path.
Oh, I'm choking up because so much of what you said is relatable to so many people, myself included.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't get over your courage. And I said this when we were first introduced. I said that it takes a lot of courage, given your role, to be that vulnerable, to let so many people know about that part of you.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get to a point where you felt comfortable and confident to share this story? I think our listeners, I know I benefit because when you say it, I don't feel so ashamed about my childhood, about my poor habits that I did. And I know
Mm-hmm.
for a fact that for decades, I too was one of the unconscious wounded on a very destructive path.
Right.
Tell me what turned for you. How were you able to come out of that?
Well, it was not easy, to be really honest. I had started the book that I wrote, my first manuscript. I started it in 2004. It was a long journey. It was sort of meandering all over the place. Um, and I ended up connecting with Martha Finney, who you also know. She introduced us.
Love
And
Martha.
Martha and I started on a path where we took, sort of some of the concepts, but really reshaped the entire book. And ultimately created and published the book Healing at Work, a guide to using career conflicts to overcome your past and build the future you deserve. But I will tell you very honestly that I almost did not go forward with publishing the book because I was extremely afraid of professional judgment because I am so open in the book. And I was also worried about family judgment because I'm also very open about the family system and the family dynamics. And I remember I was really struggling about, I knew that there was something important to share. I knew that sometimes the most difficult lessons in our life are the most important for our future. But I was almost in a place of paralyzation. I was paralyzed. And, Martha, God bless Martha, she discovered somebody named Celine DaCosta. And she knew that Celine was working with a lot of key leaders that are in the space of helping people have a more successful, more joyful life. And she said, Susan, I think you should take advantage of Celine's, it was a New Year's special, a 90-minute one-on-one intensive with Celine DaCosta. And so I thought, what the heck, I have nothing to lose. And in that session, Celine is amazing. She's been my personal coach for many years. She has really just energized and inspired so much more for me than I would have done on my own. And I'm very grateful to Martha for introducing me to her. But what Celine did in that session was she helped me step into my fear. And she also helped me realize that my why for writing the book, my why for doing my keynote, my why for developing a course to teach people how to apply the principles. My why was so much bigger than my fear. And it became, after that 90-minute session with her, it was so clear to me that I could handle all of the things that I was most afraid of. And it all originated back into my purpose for writing the book, which was to wake people up on their careers, to realize that they do not have to live the career where we get triggered at work. We get emotionally triggered by other people. We go into a tailspin. All of our old limiting beliefs come flying to the front of our brains, and we launch right into the old strategies of how we tried to stay safe when we were little. For me, it's perfectionism and people pleasing. For other people, it's using fight, bullying. And other people try to hide and stay invisible, sort of fight, flight, freeze. Freezing for me is pleasing, doing everything I can to please. But you and I both have worked with a lot of people in our careers who are the corporate bullies, the fighters. That's just another strategy. It's just a version of perfectionism, just, demonstrated in a different way. And it was really that breakthrough with Celine that said, you know what, I'm okay. I'm going to be okay no matter what happens, no matter what judgment comes along. And I stepped right into it. And that's how the book became the book.
And boy, are we happy you wrote the book.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about that book.
Sure.
I've got it right here, and there's so much to unpack and so much that you've shared. And I appreciate how you took a very practical approach. You began with a very crucial disclaimer, because you talk about a lot of triggering, potentially triggering aspects, mental illness, abuse, neglect, substance abuse. Tell me a little bit about ASDP.
Yes.
I want the listeners to learn about your ASDP philosophy.
Thank you. Yes. So when Martha and I were doing the research for the book, we discovered that nearly two-thirds of us grew up in a childhood before the age of 18 experiencing one of what are called the adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs. And these are 10 very traumatic things that happen: physical, emotional, sexual abuse, neglect, violence in the home, mental illness in the home. It's a list of 10 really serious traumas. Nearly 67% of adults that were surveyed back in the late 90s in the US, and by the way, it's been replicated in other countries as well, experienced at least one of those traumas. And Martha and I started thinking about, those of us that come from a dysfunctional past, whether you experience one of the ACEs or you grew up in a family where there was an overly critical parent, narcissistic parent. There are a lot of other traumas also, obviously, discrimination, bullying, poverty. There are many things that people experience when they're little. And we started thinking about, okay, there's so many of us, and then 40% experience 2 or more of those ACEs. And so Martha and I decided to create our own term for those of us that come out of a dysfunctional past. And it's ASDP. It stands for Adult Survivor of a Damaged Past. And it really, if you break it down, adult, we come into our workplaces every day, thinking we're bringing our current day professional self to work. What we don't always realize, and that's our adult self ideally, what we don't realize is we're actually bringing along our childhood reality with us also. So it's really focusing in on the adult. We are adults. We have the opportunity to operate in our highest functioning adult self at work, although many times we get triggered and act like and respond to and interpret things through a very dated lens. So that's the A. S is for survivor, and I love this word because it's a word of resilience. And ASDPs, those that have experienced a dysfunctional past, we have many gifts. So we are survivors. We're resilient. We're really good in chaos. We're good at reading a room. I can read an angry person a mile away. The D stands for the fact that we came from a dysfunctional or a damaged past, and we often carry damaged beliefs about ourselves. I know a very senior level person whose underlying belief is that he can't do anything right because his dad told him that all the time. So there are many limiting beliefs. So that the D is the dysfunctional past and damaged beliefs about ourselves that we carry today. The P stands for past, and that is just a recognition that a lot of the things that we're doing unconsciously in the workplace are actually originated from our past. And it's an opportunity to realize that even though the things may have happened to us in the past, we can actually break through that. And so it's recognizing that the past is an important part of who we are, but it's understanding and unlocking the impact of that past and how it may be showing up for us in dysfunctional ways in our careers. So that is ASDP. We created that term ourselves.
I think that this is a major contribution to moving the workplace healing forward.
Thank you.
Giving it a name. I agree that survivor does speak to the resilience. And I remember when I was reading the draft of your book and I was looking at those, was it 10 aspects that would define a damaged past? Mm-hmm. And I think I was 3 or 4 as well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I shared very openly when I recognized your book that I couldn't stop crying.
I remember.
And for me, and I owe your book to a major part of my healing, Susan. I don't know if I told you, but your words having been put out there at your level just gave me freedom, gave me permission to forgive myself. Mm. I think you said freeze. My freezing was I would make myself small.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would minimize myself. I lacked confidence despite people around me encouraging me. But I couldn't have self-talk based on my damaged past that could support my belief. But your book transformed that.
Aww.
I started working, taking baby steps to go on the path of self-compassion and ultimately self-love.
Yes.
And so I will be forever grateful for your book. This was a major contribution.
Well, thank you. I'm humbled. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think HR practitioners, leaders, humans, anyone can benefit from this book. I love the premise also about the childhood, because I used to joke that we all show up at work with a number over our head. If you could imagine some futuristic concept of work, and we all show up at work with a number over our head, and that number is the age in which we first got harmed in some way and we didn't overcome it or heal from it.
Right.
My number has always been 7.
Oh.
And so your book takes the reader through your story, other stories, but most important, and I think this is so critical, you provide a framework of how organizations, if they want to create systematic ways for healing at work, or individuals. So tell me a little bit about your playbook. What could people do to heal?
Well, there's a really key concept, and you and I both love it. Martha and I both independently were thinking about this. We think about workplace conflict through the lens of a bumper car moment. That's one of our phrases and one of our terms, is that at work we crash into one another. And it literally sometimes feels like we've just crashed. Maybe we said something that triggered somebody else. They get mad at us. Or maybe someone else does something. We get missed for promotion or interrupted in a meeting or excluded from a meeting or whatever it is. And we feel this like emotional explosion going on inside of our heads. And so in the book, and then also in the course that I have actually a couple different courses. I teach people how to leverage those bumper car moments as catalysts for emotional healing. Because our natural response to a bumper car moment is to go right into that spiraling down, into that, the limiting belief comes flying to the front of our brains. We immediately go into fight, flight, or freeze. All of our old strategies start to come forward. And, it's I was talking to somebody the other day who described it as a crushing feeling. And it's an exhausting feeling, and it's always being in a state of hypervigilance, kind of always gauging what's going on at work and when am I going to, when do I need to move? And so I use the bumper car moment as the catalyst, essentially using those moments as a literally a laboratory for emotional healing, because it's in those moments that all these old things get triggered. And what's really interesting, the book's also got a very strong science base in terms of the neuroplasticity and the ability of our brains to be rewired. We can rewire the neural pathways in our brains. And it's also got a lot of the research around positive psychology, which basically says when we focus on positive things, we will improve the quality of our lives and we will reduce depression. And so through a lot of different ways that, I have a 3-step method to use when you find yourself in a bumper car moment. I call it the rapid power reclaim, because in those moments we aren't feeling too powerful. And so how do you reclaim your own power as quickly as possible? And the framework's simple. It's a 3-step method. And step 1, as soon as you realize you've been triggered, you have that emotional energy going on and the fear and the anger and the sadness or whatever is happening for you, overwhelmed, worried about getting fired. I mean, it goes to extremes for many of us. Is very first step. Number 1 is create choice. What I mean by that is that when we're in that triggered state, we are not able to have choice. It's the fight, flight, or freeze mode. So we have to process that emotion out of us. And I know we don't have time today to get into the details of that, but there are different techniques you can use to move the emotion, which is simply energy, out of your body. Once you create choice, then you can take step 2 is make a decision about how you want to elevate your action in this situation. And of course, every situation is different. I have a million examples of what this looks like. But then when you elevate your action, you realize that you're not responding from that old past. You're responding from the current day. You're looking at it through the lens of understanding how the limiting beliefs may be fueling the fire. And instead of reacting or responding on the unconscious wounded career path, which is all that worry and distress, we actually get to elevate our action. And so it's just making a conscious choice about what can I do in this situation to elevate my action. And then step 3 is once we've done that, this is a really important step. It's the step of integrating that new way of responding into our neural pathways. I call it celebrate and integrate. And what I mean by that is when we use those moments, those bumper car moments, to start to unwind our past reactions and thoughts, we can actually start to realize we don't have to get caught in that trap. So step 3 is celebrate when you've done something differently. And I'm not good at celebrating. Us perfectionists aren't. So I had to create a little list in my phone and my notes of things I can do to celebrate, like going out and or going downtown with my husband and having some ice cream or taking a hot bath, something. Because when you celebrate, when you focus on the positive, you are then able to integrate it into your identity. So I have a lot of more, system around what I'm talking about, but that's a high level description of one of the key frameworks.
Oh, Susan, I love, love, love the bumper car concept. It's actually on the cover of your book, and I think that's so appropriate.
Thank you.
So let's just close out with that. It's a little challenging. So leave the audience with how can we do it? Because these steps sound so easy, but you and I both know that they aren't. You mentioned before your coach.
Yeah.
Give us some other suggestions of how we can get to the point where we can truly take these steps.
I think the first thing, Laurie, is recognizing that we are staying too often in a state of pain. So it's taking and being conscious and making an intentional choice to start to pay attention to those moments of pain. And so when I get triggered, I immediately stop myself and I say, okay, Susan, it's a bumper car moment. Here you go. You can either stay on that unconscious wounded career path in that place of all that pain and distress, or I can use my 3-step method. And I do my 3-step method on myself all the time.
Susan, thank you.
You're welcome.
This has been a wonderful, insightful conversation. I want to encourage everyone to run out and get healing at work. Take your courses, listen to all of your talks, because you're doing just what you've committed to do. You're helping professionals heal at work.
Just one last thing, because you and I were talking about it earlier, is that I discovered in the early 2000s through an amazing organization called Pathways to Successful Living, my purpose, my life purpose And my life purpose is to teach self-acceptance to create a more joyful world, which is what Healing at Work was designed to do, was to help people get to a place where we realize nobody else gets to decide if we're good enough. That is our job. And that has been the motivation. And I just wanted to mention that because that piece about self-acceptance is so hard for so many of us. But with practice, I say one of our phrases, Martha and I, is damage is not doomed and the rest of your life is yours.
Susan, I think that's a wonderful way to close out this segment. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been
Thank you, Laurie.
Such an enlightening and meaningful discussion.
I greatly appreciate the opportunity to share. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into Working Forward. If you like what you hear, please share it with others and make sure you're following the show to not miss an episode. We are available anywhere you get your audio. See you next time.